Auxpert here, and welcome to the Game Grinder. Today I'm doing a response video to Levitt the Retro Gamer. He tagged me in the topic, do I beat games multiple times? And I think the simplest and to the point answer is, yeah, of course. So, good night everybody. Just joking, but seriously though, I put a little bit of thought into this. It kind of expanded in some areas that I've never really put too much consideration into when it comes to beating a game. Like, what constitutes beating a game? Do some games not have any sort of completion? Like something like Overwatch, it's a match-based game, you just kind of play the game over and over again. But it also expands into some other, like, more in the PC realm of things. So a game like Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead has campaigns, start to finish, that you play through. I guess there's kind of an end to the story of Left 4 Dead, but at the same time you just replay this stuff over and over again. So would that constitute beating a game? I think so, more specifically with Left 4 Dead compared to Overwatch. But then there are some other games like the Diablo games, and then also Diablo 3 included, where you just play through the game over and over. There are a couple other PC games that definitely are start to finish ending kind of games, story-based games that I do play through every few years. I've talked about it before quite a few times, but of course Dead Space, one of my favorite horror games ever. I'd say I play through this probably every 3, maybe 4 years. I've played through it like 3 or 4 times at this point, and I think it was released in 2008? I can't remember exactly. But then the other one, and this is Orange Box, but Portal being a quick game to play through if you kind of know how things go, so that's never a problem to sit down and just play through in one sitting, and it's a blast. I love the game. I haven't played through the second one more than once, and that kind of goes in with kind of some of the things I was thinking about here, and this will go into some of the retro games. But I think a lot of us growing up when we were kids, we didn't have a lot of access to video games all the time. Like, once in a while our parents could buy us games or we could rent games, but definitely not what it's like having an income and being able to buy games at will. So when I was younger, a lot of those games I tended to play through over and over and over again. A lot of my Nintendo games I've beaten multiple times. There are a few in general that I would say I play more than others. As I got older, of course, moving into the PS2 era with the PC games is when I had my first job. I was working, so I had extra funds to get games. Early 2000s, I was definitely pirating a lot of PC games, just because I didn't have the abundance of income. Since that point, I would say that I have played through games a lot less multiple times, just because I'm constantly playing games. Like, I can't even keep up with the games that I haven't played yet, but I definitely do replay games here and there. Most recently was Until Dawn, which I did a review of, and I talked about it in the review. Just enjoyed the game enough where I wanted to play through it a second time to get the results that I had hoped for. And I know I've talked about it a million times at this point, but the Shantae games, a lot of fun, shorter games, so it's not a big problem to sit down and play through them again. I've played through these 3 times since I've first discovered the games, and I just have a blast every time. Now, going back to my Newblit days with the NES, like I said, there's a lot of games that I replayed all the time, but there are a few games over the years that I do revisit every few years or so to replay them. Definitely one of the easiest ones to bust out is Jackal when you have friends over. Love this game, it's a blast, I love the soundtrack, and it's not a crazy challenging game, just the right amount of challenge where you might need to use a continue. And then one of my favorite go-tos is the Guardian Legend. The copy's a little beat up, but this is a game that I've beaten many times over the years. Really interesting game. Something about it, I've never really specifically been able to put my finger on it, that I just love about that game. And then, I've talked about this game many times. If anybody knows where I'm going with this, this is the game on the NES that I consider my favorite, that I always revisit every few years. Definitely not popular opinion by any means, but Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. I can't tell you how many times I've played through this game. It's just super comfy for me for some reason, and I just love the soundtrack. So then moving up to the Super Nintendo was kind of the same deal. I had to trade in some of my Nintendo games to be able to get Super Nintendo games, so I tended to play those games over and over. Although, of course, there are a few games that I have played many, many times. I would say definitely the most played game for the Super Nintendo would be Chrono Trigger. Of course, to get all the different endings, and this is just one of those games every few years I just gotta sit down and play through it. Just love it that much. And also Final Fantasy 3 included, or Final Fantasy 6, however you want to refer to it. But, you know, two of the best games ever made. I'll never get tired of them. And then kind of with the co-op, not necessarily co-op too much in my experiences with these games, but Secret of Mana and Secret of Evermore are two other games that I revisit every once in a while. I might not play these to completion, but just to sit down and kind of enjoy the nostalgia, as it were. So then moving up to the PS1, where kind of when time shifted for me, I had my first job, had, you know, money to spend on games at will. A few years later, when I moved out on my own, is when, you know, that was a lot less restricted. So at that point is kind of when replaying games really started to slow down. But there are a few games, of course, that I played through many times. And I've talked about this before, but one of the motivating factors to get my first job was so I could get a PlayStation for one game in particular, and that is Final Fantasy VII. And I've played through this game quite a few times, and there's kind of a funny story to it. Actually, my first playthrough, I actually had to play through the game 3 different times, and if my dad is watching, he probably remembers this, but during my first playthrough, at the same time my dad was playing it as well, he had played some other RPGs over the years, and he accidentally saved over my save file 2 different times. The second time he actually locked me out of the house and wouldn't let me in because he thought I'd be so mad about it. But, you know, despite that, I love the game and I just played through it again, and I've never actually played through it to the point where trying to get like the Knights of the Round or the Chocobos. Just, I don't really dig that sort of grinding sort of stuff, but definitely played through that a few times. And of course, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, one of my favorite games of all time. It's just always great to revisit that game, never gets old. And then of course one of my favorite game series of all time, Metal Gear Solid. This is one of the games that's nothing for me to sit down and revisit. Some people say it doesn't necessarily hold up, and that's a debate for a different time, but I just love playing through that game in particular. And then I think lastly here is going to be Resident Evil 2. Of course, playing through this game one time would kind of be playing through it twice, because you play through as Claire and Leon, but that's another game over the years I just sit down, throw it in. Really excited for the remake, and same with Final Fantasy VII. Well, I think this has probably dragged on a little longer than it should have. Just wanted to share a couple thoughts I had about beating games in general, just the idea of that, and kind of walk through the years and revisit some of the games that I revisit all the time. So, of course, I would be interested to hear your thoughts on this. I'm not doing any additional tags on this, so if this sounds like a topic you would be interested in talking about, you know, long or short, feel free to do so, and send me a link if you do. So, of course, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you next time on The Game Grinder.